Welcome to the Self Within podcast, where we will look to ancient traditions and modern insights to seek guidance, knowledge, and practical tools to help us reconnect with our true selves. Join me, your host, as we explore various topics from mindfulness and meditation to energy healing, astrology, and much more. We'll hear from experts and everyday individuals to explore the connections that exist between mind, body, and spirit, and how we can use them for personal growth. We live in a time where so much of what we hear about is living in the present moment. And yes, while this is true, I would argue that we don't spend enough time thinking about our past, about those who came before us, our ancestors, those who have helped to set the foundation for our values, our beliefs, and even our wounds and negative patterns, and the traumas of our parents and grandparents. The truth is that even though we're generations removed from our ancestors, their imprints still show up in our present reality. So, how can we unentangle ourselves from them and break free from generational traumas to create a healthier family dynamic, not only for ourselves, but for future generations? And today I am so excited to talk about this very topic with Ancestral Healing Practitioner Kimiko Kawabori. Welcome, Kimiko. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. And I'm really excited to talk about this topic because for me, it's all of a sudden come into my view. It's not
Mhm.
like I didn't know anything about my ancestors before, but for some reason this year, it was such a strong pull to dive into it, to figure it out, to explore it. And then I stumbled upon you, which I'm like so grateful for because I was like doing all this research online. I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I got to do it with someone and who can guide me because that was really the thing for me. But before we even get into that, for people that have never heard of ancestral healing, what is this? And then how might it differ from other types of healing work?
Sure. So, ancestral healing is something that was done in most cultures all around the world and in some form. And the general concept is that we used to live in really tight, closed societies. And the elders were the people that we looked to for guidance and wisdom. And they were the ones that passed down the culture and traditions. And they knew the best fishing spots or the best hunting spots. They knew the best ways to deal with extreme weather patterns. They knew how to navigate. And so we really revered them in their life for how they helped us survive. And when they died, we made sure that they were given a really nice, proper funeral, made sure their souls were at ease. And then in their death, we continued to look at them and go to them for wisdom and guidance. And these people, these dead people, these ancestors became part of our everyday life because they continued to be with us. So it's a concept that used to be everywhere, but it's not so much in our culture these days. And it differs from other types of healing work because with other healers and other modalities, it's like someone performs healing on you, they do it on your behalf. But with this work, it's the client that becomes empowered to do the work themselves. So they meet their healing guide and they work with that guide and they are empowered to do all the work for their people. And I also think what's very unique is that the healing guide that people work with is someone that is from your own DNA. So you have parts of them within you, they have parts of you within them because you're from the same ancestral stream. And
Mm.
so you get advice from this person that's really tailored, really specific to what you need because they really understand you on a very intrinsic level because you are literally part of each other. And so it's a different kind of targeted healing that is not necessarily available from people who do that work to you because they're not part of your ancestral stream.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you have the answers, right? I
Yeah.
hear that a lot. And as a guide myself for Reiki, when working with clients, that's like my biggest thing is helping them find their own answers. You can guide them there and hopefully things open up. And then dots begin to connect and it makes sense. And then you can take the next step. But there were so many things that you said. It sounds so silly, but I was thinking of all these Disney movies as you're talking about this. When you talked about the fisherman, I'm like, Moana. And then you were talking about this person that you're connecting with, like at an intrinsic level. And I'm like, Coco. But that's really interesting that Disney is picking up on these ancestral themes. But number one, I love those movies because they're really great and they explain it at such a like easy, simple way. And yeah, I love this traditional view that you're right, that we used to have of honoring our ancestors, remembering our ancestors, going to them for wisdom. I was lucky enough to grow up with my great grandmother, and she was a person that we would definitely go to for certain things.
Yeah.
She had the family history. She knew of the people that had died before we were around, and she could tell those stories, and the stories were so impactful. And I think living in Western society, it's something that does begin to get more diluted. And so doing the work to go back generations, and I'm doing some of this work with you as my guide, and going back 50, 100, like generations back, people that I don't know, never have connected with, and essentially trusting that they are there to really help me figure out my family wounds, or I guess to heal them, to bless them is a lot about what we talk about.
Yeah, that ancestral memory is so important. And there's so many different ways people have lost touch with that ability to connect to the ancestors and connect to those traditional ancient ways. Yeah.
And, we talk a lot about generational traumas.
Yeah.
So, how do these wounds or subconscious patterns that come from past generations, how do they show up in our everyday life? How do they show up in the present?
Yeah. There's some like phrases that get tossed around like, oh, the skeleton's in the closet, or that's the family pattern, or chip off the old block, or apple doesn't fall far from the
Oh,
tree, you know? And usually, in my experience, I feel like I've heard those in negative connotations. And so it's stuff like that that people recognize as like a family thing. And it could be a personality trait, it could be mental illness or a physical illness. I've heard some people say, like, oh, everybody in this family has had a heart attack before the age of 60 or something like that. So it can show up as those really intense patterns that just keep showing up over and over through the generations.
mm, that's funny that you say that. Sometimes I wonder, like, is it a self-fulfilling prophecy too? Because recently I've heard my dad, and he's in his mid 70s, and he has this worry because all of the men on his side of the family have died around this time. And so he has this like, I'm next. And I'm like, I don't know if we need to think about it that way. But in a way, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. But then you are going back into history and saying, like, well, this has happened a lot in my family. But yeah, that's interesting that you say that.
Yeah. 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 And it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, definitely. Or it could be people are like, oh, my mother lived till she was 102 and my dad lived until
Yeah.
he was 98. So hopefully I have a long life too. Right. So it could be the other way around as well.
Oh, totally, totally.
Yeah.
But you were saying about the skeletons in the
Mhm.
closet. And I think that's where a lot of this, I'm interested in the patterns because there are these familial patterns that, whether we like them or not, positive or negative, they do seem to stick. And some of the patterns I would say we don't even realize we had. Like there's been a pattern that I've discovered recently based on our work together that I had no idea even existed. But now that I'm going through the work, it's become so obvious. It's like, oh, of course. Now I understand why there's so much heaviness on this lineage of mine. So for myself, I'm starting to connect dots. But there are these things that I think a lot of times when it comes to our past, our ancestors, some of the stories we know, and some of them are hearsay, they've been passed down and so forth, but some of them we don't know. So maybe you can explain a little bit about how doing this work really can help you to uncover some of these things. And as I'm saying that, I'm also thinking you have to be vulnerable, right? Like you may be going into places where it's scary. You may uncover some things that you don't like. I don't know if you have experiences with other clients you worked with where that's been the case or
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that is one of the kind of difficult things about doing this work is it's a little bit of Pandora's box. You don't really know what you're going to get into, and it can be difficult to know how to, like, what do you do with that information? Like, okay, so I know this pattern exists, but what do I do? And how do I heal it? And what if I don't feel comfortable with knowing about this pattern? And I think that's where the reliance on the healing guide can really come into to play, where you give it up to that ancestor to be like, wow, this is a big thing. What can I do in my life? And what can I do in my human form as a living person on this earth? How can I help my people? How can I help myself first deal with this? And I think too that as an adoptee, I didn't know anything about my family, my biological family history. So it was really fascinating to learn all these different things about myself and my people. And so it was like, I guess I'm going to just take this information as it is and believe it because I don't have anyone to ask, is this actually a burden? Is this actually a blessing? Does this actually exist? So for me to just take that information in and kind of like you were mentioning about having it not be a self-fulfilling prophecy, like, oh, my people are, we have debilitating anxiety. I don't want to take that on as a thing, but I want to know that that could be a thing and then try to figure out how to heal it and how to work with that in myself. And if I see that coming up, what can I do to change things? Or what can I do to make it not be something that is truth just because I heard it and
mm,
just 'cause I want to relate to my people. So there's a kind of a balance there too, and a filtering of, yes, this information came through my ancestors, but how can I work with it in a way that's maybe healthy and healing to my life?
it's almost like it's your choice to take what you feel is going to be beneficial for you while still knowing that yes there are parts that may be like debilitating anxiety, maybe mental illness, but by connecting with your guide, and we do all of this through essentially going into a deep meditation where we really go inward, we connect with our guide, and then we can talk to our guide. We ask it questions, it gives us messages. And at the end of the day, we are trying to heal certain areas of that lineage. And when that happens, we bring the healing then into the present moment. And I think that's where you can then begin to differentiate or decide for yourself, okay, does the anxiety feel lighter? Maybe it's something you've always carried, but does it feel lighter now that you've gone through and healed that lineage? And that's a little bit about what I experienced for myself, but maybe you can explain it differently, or I don't know if I'm hitting the mark there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's like something about facing something that is a little difficult where you have to walk through the emotion in order to
Mm.
process it. You have to face the thing that seems kind of scary or overwhelming in order to process it and know what you're dealing with. I don't know if this is going to help answer that, but it reminds me of this concept, the way that I see that ancestral healing can help individuals and their families is if you can imagine yourself in a river and you're standing downstream in the river and upstream is just all the ancestral energy and medicine and the blessings and the burdens and everything that your ancestors have passed on to you. And as you're standing in this river, you're noticing, oh, wow, I see big, huge boulders. There's a lot of the same type of boulder keeps rolling past me, and I see it going down to the future generations. And wow, these boulders might not look very pleasant or happy. And so you decide you don't want that boulder to go down to the generation. And so you pick it up and you look at it and you're like, huh, let me study this. Let me see where it came from. Why did you get started? How did you get started? And you work with your healing guide and you're like, what can be done to heal this? How do we help this? And you do what's necessary to heal and bring healing and light and whatever's needed to help these boulders become less heavy or even disappear completely. And then you notice there's different animals that coming to the river, like a deer or something, or the water's a little clearer. And then you see another type of boulder and you're like, okay, let's pick this one up. Let's look at this one. Let's figure out where this came from, how to alleviate some of the burden, some of the darkness of this. And then eventually over time with that healing, you see these boulders less and less. So there's a lot of different healing in life and maybe lightness that's starting to flow into the river. And maybe now you can see little like twigs and branches, and you do the same thing. You pick it up, you look at it, ask what's needed to heal it, and then just start to notice this river become clearer. So it's like that, just being able to be the one to look at the things and to face it and to ask for what's needed so that you don't have to be pummeled by these boulders. You don't have to watch your future generation also be impacted by the boulders and all the twigs and all the ways that the ancestral stream gets caught up.
Yeah, it's like you're cleaning it out. You're cleaning
Yeah.
out the area,
Yeah.
right? And the healing, we're talking a lot about the healing, but I think for every person, it might look different in terms of what's needed or what the guide recommends or suggests that is
Definitely.
needed to be done. There's not one way or one look of it.
Right. That's so true. Yeah, everyone is very different. Even between the lineages for one person, it can be incredibly different. Even session to session, sometimes the guides can be very active and talkative. Sometimes they're very quiet, and there's just a different medicine that's needed that in that hour in session. So, yeah, it varies. It's hard to know what's going to happen in any given session, which is fun and exciting and different and challenging and new. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to share because we had a recent session and I was working on a brand new lineage. And this was a lineage that I had already felt was pretty heavy. And then I remember we were trying to find my guide and nobody wanted to come. I mean, that was one of the things that was so different when I started with a different lineage. And the one that I started with was pretty easy. It was like the guide came, we did the work together. He didn't really have that many messages for me. It was very straightforward. And it was like, oh, that was easy, done. I go into this next lineage and I could sense that people were looking at me from behind a wall or a rock. Like people were peering in at me. And I remember hearing, why are you here? And there was resistance, was the best way I can describe it. And I felt alone and I felt lost. And that was a much harder lineage to find my guide. Eventually we found it, but it took a while. And it also hit my heart because I could sense that there was some sadness. There was like, I don't know if it was abandonment, fear, whatever it was. And we haven't fully cleared that lineage. We're just starting. But I wanted to bring that up because going back to what we were saying, where all of the different lineages are very different
Yeah.
in terms of what you experience. You know, as much as we talk about our fear of looking at the skeletons in the closet, there is also, as I learned, fear from the other side, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, or where have you been? Like, why now? It's like, oh, I'm just trying to do some work here.
Right? No, yeah, that's such a good point because sometimes it has been hundreds, thousands of years since anyone's turned to this lineage and offered anything. So people on that lineage might just be like, what? Like confused. They've been not working with the living for so long that they're just like, what's happening? And lots of people are curious about who the person is looking into the lineage. Yeah.
And we talk a lot about the lineage, and I want to make sure that we address it because in case people are not familiar with it. But when you do the work, what exactly are you looking at, especially when we talk about the lineage? If you could just outline what that would look like for someone coming in to do the work.
Yeah. So you talked about finding the healing guide. So that person is the last person on that lineage who remembers all of the health, all the wellness, all the goodness, the medicine, the antidotes to any heaviness and burdens of your people of that one lineage. So everyone has four lineages. It's mother's mother, mother's father, father's father, father's mother's lineage. And then if you're adopted, you have others, however many people adopted you. And so between you and whoever is deceased in your lineage and that healing guide, so you've got the healing guide, and they represent all of the well ancestors that came before them. And then you have between that healing guide and whoever is the last deceased person, you have people who are going to be in need of healing because they're not well and healthy. And so when you look at the line, you're looking at the whole thing, but mostly you're working with your guide to help you navigate through all of that unhealthy, unhealed ancestral energy. And so with like your last line that you just healed, we had a cocoon at one point. So it contains all of those unhealthy ancestors, and then they reside in the cocoon while they heal. And then eventually everybody's let out. So the line, it's that whole thing. And throughout the healing process, it'll change from being those unhealed ones in the cocoon to eventually everybody gets let out, and then everybody's healed and able to have that same kind of strong energy as your healing guide.
And what makes someone or one of your ancestors unwell?
Mm, could be a lot of things, being separated from culture in whatever way. There's lots of different ways with exploration, colonization, people taking over one's village.
Mm.
Culture gets separated and people aren't able to do the ancestral healing that they need. Or it just, as people's lives change and they get further and further from their culture, it breaks some of that tradition. Abuse of different kinds can help break all those structures down, those traditional healing structures down as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you go through all four of your lines, you heal them. Is there ever a point where the healing work is done, or does that really just continue?
It does. So a complete healed lineage is when you've done all five steps, which is to do an assessment of your people, and then you meet your healing guide. The healing guide puts everyone in a cocoon. Eventually, everybody's released from that cocoon and are well and healed ancestors. And then you bring all of that healed energy to the living and then to yourself and out into the world. And so that is technically in the ancestral healing modality that I do of Dr. Daniel 4. That's complete. But this ancestral healing is also you're building a relationship with your people. So just like with any relationship, it doesn't really end because you continue your relationship. And even as people pass on, you continue relationship with people after death. And there's also a lot of really cool things you can do once you have a couple healed lineages is you can harmonize the lineages. So you take the two lineages that are healed or however many and you harmonize them outside of your energy field and they harmonize together, and then you invite that harmonization to flow into your energy field. And so those lineages that are healed can also work well within yourself too. So that's a really cool one, especially for adoptive families. I've found that as adoptees harmonize their biological and their and adoptive lineages, it can be a really supportive kind of ritual to make sure that everybody is working well together. And then also you can use your any healed lineages, you can bring them into council and ask them to basically be like, helpers for you. Like if you're dealing with a big question, let me call my council in and see what's going on. So yeah, I've had some clients that have healed lineages and they are like, I need a counsel. I need you to walk me through asking about this big life change in my counsel. So we'll do counsel. I call it counsel work together with,
Wow.
yeah.
That's so cool. You talked earlier how when you were going through your own healing and being an adoptee, that you had to trust the fact that what they were saying was true. Did you find that after you healed all your lineages that it was lighter for you, or what was that experience like for you after going through the process?
Hmm. Yeah. There's like before ancestral healing and after ancestral healing. It was like such a big change.
Okay.
Oh my gosh. I think for my adoptive, or no, for my biological lines, first of all, I did those four first. They helped me understand myself on such a deeper level that I did not know that this work could provide for me. And part of the reason I came to ancestral healing is because I was secondarily rejected by both biological parents. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I still want to know about my family. And I'm like, could ancestral healing show me my family? And could it show me myself? And so, yeah, it definitely did. I got a lot of mirroring. That's a concept that where children who are raised by biological parents or biological family can see their reflection of like mannerisms or the way that someone talks or physical features that adoptees don't get. And so I was able to find some like personality characteristics in myself in my biological family, biological ancestors, which was totally wild. I just did not ever consider I could see that. For example, my birth father's mother's line, she showed up to me as a diamond, that my healing guide. And she told me that our burden of our people was that under pressure, we either just completely crumble or we can become a diamond. And I was like, oh my God, because I'd never been able to explain my personality so well ever. I was like, that one sentence is totally me. And it was just, it freaked me out. It was so awesome. So I was able to find belonging in my ancestors that I just don't have access to in my real life. So that was like game changer, total game changer. And then with my adoptive family, I was able to see them in a very different light. Like I was able to see that they are also dealing with blessings and burdens, and they're also just doing the best they can, just like all of us,
Mm.
with the ancestral blessings and burdens that they have. So it made them more human, more relatable to me, and that really softened my heart towards them because I'm the black sheep in the family. So it was always like, it was
Yeah.
always a big
Yeah.
rub. And so I was like, oh, but they're just doing the best they can, just like we all are with what we have in our ancestral past. So, yeah. And I'd done so many different types of healing modalities and tried everything to throw it at my adoptee pain, and healing those 8 total lines were total game changers for me in how I understood myself, how I understood my family, and then how I understood my place in the world, and the fact that I was not alone. I have ancestors that are there for me, and I'm like, wow, I have more family that's available to me. That's crazy. Yeah.
That's so cool. I love that. As you were talking, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. It's crazy how you get these messages and they just hit home. If you heard it somewhere else, like it wouldn't have made sense. But the fact that it was said to you by your guide, it's like, yes,
Yes, exactly.
so cool. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It was really, yeah, beautiful stuff. And I'm like, I'm like, I have to bring this to other people, because it just hits on such a different level.
Yeah. I mean, I can already say that the fact that I did the healing of this one lineage, it has already brought shifts. And I remember telling you this where I was like, I don't know if it's from this work or there's something going on in the cosmos or what's happening, but I noticed definitely much more of a desire. I think and this was kind of silly, but to cook traditional meals.
Love that. I
And
love that.
I mean, cooking has been one of those things where I have my own traumas about like food and cooking in the kitchen and a whole bunch of stuff that definitely comes from my childhood. So, in a way, like in my adulthood, I have tried to avoid it and it stresses me out. It causes me to become a different person, especially if I'm cooking for myself. I'm like, that's fine. But if I'm cooking for other people, it's like, I just don't want to do it, you know? And all of a sudden, after these sessions, it's like I'm looking up recipes. I'm already like telling my husband, I'm going to cook this meal. I'm going to take Christmas dinner. He's like, who are you? I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I definitely want to do this. And
Um,
it's kind of weird, but at the same time, I'm very open and accepting of it because that's been a big struggle for me. So, yeah,
yeah, yeah.
the shifts can come in different and unexpected ways, but I'm definitely attributing it to my work here and feeling a lot lighter on that side. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's such a good shift. That's an exciting shift.
It is. It is. Because just like you said, I've tried lots of other techniques and modalities to work on that part of me that I know has been there and it's been a resistance. And
Mhm.
it's like I'll experience little mindset shifts, but not enough of an impact to truly change it. And I think this is the first time where I really feel like it's different. It just feels different. So I'm looking forward to seeing what the next lineage healing can bring into my life. And I'm doing it definitely for myself. But as you were saying, you want to bring it to other people. And for me, it's how does this then impact my children and my children's children and future generations down the line that I'll probably never get to meet?
Mhm. Yeah. And that's also a trust part of this is that we might not see how the future generations are going to change from that, but we got to trust that it's doing something because I know that my life has changed. And so I'd like to think that it has a ripple effect. There's a quote, and I don't know who said it, but something like the best thing you can do to heal the world is heal yourself first, something like that.
Oh, 100%. I totally
Mhm.
believe that.
So I feel like with ancestral healing, that's what we're doing is we're cleaning up our own stuff, our ancestors' stuff, and then it just who knows what the ripple effect will bring. Yeah.
And there's something I'm curious about. Maybe this is going off topic, but I know that we're coming upon a time where the veil is thinnest to connect with your ancestors. And is it November 1st?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, November 1st, which I know that in many countries you have the Day of the Dead, you have lots of other cultural celebrations that happen on this day. What does it actually mean when we say that the veil is the thinnest for kind of connecting with our spirits? And is there ever a time when the veil is the thickest?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if there's a time when it's the thickest. But with the veil being thinner, I all the different cultures that have that celebration around this time, they have their different kind of reasoning.
Mm.
Um, for me, with Japanese culture, the ancestors are celebrated in the summer months, so it's kind of
Oh.
it's all very different. But with this coming up holiday, I'm not really 100% sure, but I think it's something about the changing of the seasons
Mm.
and going shifting into winter hibernation, going within kind of energy. Yeah.
Yeah, my mom, she always likes to make, they call it pan de muerto, which is like the bread of the dead.
Right.
And so there's very traditional foods that she makes. It's like a purple drink that's made out of like purple corn. And then you have this special bread. And I remember growing up, we would light a candle for the people that have passed. And last year, I had set up a little altar with my grandmothers, and I've actually just kept it up. And it's nice to see them. I always feel like they're watching over me.
Yes.
So yeah, and I'm excited to, I think something you said earlier about having that relationship. And that was another thing that really pulled me into this because I've always felt like family and relationships are very important to me.
Mhm.
And so the fact that I could now begin to have relationships with people that I've never met
Mhm.
sounds really cool. And I'm okay with accepting the work because I know relationships are always work and they're complicated, right? But I'm okay with accepting it. And if it's lighting a candle or saying a prayer or whatever it is.
Yeah, but something you said reminded me that there's another thing that can happen once you have a healed line is if you want to meet someone who was a good cook in your lineage, in the healed lineage that you have, you could ask to meet them and you could build a relationship with them and, just cook with them and invite them to cook with you. And yeah,
Oh my God, really?
yeah, yeah.
Oh, so you can even like create different councils for different things.
Yes, totally.
That is so cool.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I love that concept so much. I've asked to meet like adoptees in my line. I'm like, is there anyone that was adopted or had an experience with being adopted? And yeah, anyone else that like to travel, I use them as like my travel guides when I'm
Mm.
about to travel. I'm like, okay, can you help protect me on this journey? So, specialty people that can help me.
That makes me think about quantum leaping, and which is a whole nother topic. But from my understanding of quantum leaping is that you can go into a different timeline, whether it's like a future timeline or a past timeline of yourself, and bring in your wisdom or strengths or gifts that you might have from that timeline into your present.
That's
And
cool.
although this is very different, I feel like by connecting with your ancestors, you're also bringing in strengths and wisdom, but it's not necessarily coming from you, but it's coming from maybe that intrinsic part of you, like it's coming from your lineage. We learn things from our parents all the time, whether it was how to change the tire on a car to like how to be a good speaker, whatever it is. And I think this is a different way of acquiring strengths and wisdoms, which I think is really cool.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I loved about this work too, when I first was learning about it, is that sometimes people don't have the healthy parts of their family reflected in their living family. So
Mm,
sometimes the relationship that they build with their ancestors is the only representation of healthy family members that someone could have, but it is available to anyone that wants to seek that out.
mm, that's
Yeah.
interesting, actually.
Yeah, really powerful that you can continue to have that access, even if you don't have it represented in how you've seen your family act or behave.
Right. Because if we really think about it, it's like there could have been an experience that caused it to shift, and then it got passed down to your family. And so you're getting the shitty end of the stick in a way. And so I hadn't thought about it that like that, but and that's maybe a part of finding the well ones, right? It's about finding those that came before that shift happened or before that experience happened and reconnecting with them.
Yeah, exactly. And knowing that they're available, that exists, that you can have some strong examples of family and behavior and patterns and whatnot.
I love that. So, if someone is just beginning their journey into ancestral healing, what advice would you have for them or any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think my advice would be to learn how to develop and trust in your own intuition, because that's something that I find is very sadly missing from Western culture, is that we aren't really supported in trusting our guts or listening, getting information from any other source like a knowingness or a feeling. And this ancestral work is talking with the dead. And so that's a different form of communication. And the information that they're going to send you doesn't come in the way that we're used to talking face to face. It'll come in a knowingness or in a feeling or in a visual or something. And so developing that intuition, developing that sense of getting information in a different way is really important in this work. And just in general, intuition is very overlooked in Western society. So I think that's just a good thing to connect back with.
Yeah, I agree. And I can even second that and just saying that in talking to my guides, it was like the first response was it. And I didn't question it. I wasn't trying to seek more, even though I may not have liked it or it might
Mhm.
have seemed like it was off. I'm like, okay, it's a yes or it's a no. And that's kind of how I got it. And so I was just trying to accept whatever it was. And sometimes it took a while to hear it, but yeah, when it came, it's like, okay, I'm not gonna question.
Right. And you have experience with doing that kind of communication. I think when people don't have that experience, it's very confusing and people second guess and they just really try to think about it. So it can be a little challenging when people aren't used to having that kind of communication.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I think that's great advice, great tip. And I know if anyone wants to connect with you, I will include your link and more information about you in the show notes.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you so much for being on and talking with us.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you're interested in becoming a client and working with me, visit me at nunatherapy.com or follow me on social media at Nuna Therapy for regular content and inspiration. Until next time.